I know you're on a limited time schedule, correct? Correct, as always.
I am.
All right. All right. So just for folks that are joining us, we're going to get started right now. And to just let you know, for those that need it, we do have closed captioning available. It's in the bottom right-hand corner. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you. I am David Levine, the co-founder and president of the American Sustainable Business Council. And on behalf of ASBC, our strategic partner, Social Venture Circle, all of our members and co-sponsored, we're pleased to be able to host this webinar today with over 1,000 people registered to hear from Gina McCarthy and our panel of business leaders. For those not familiar with the American Sustainable Business Council, we're a growing coalition of business organizations and companies advancing policies at the local, state, and national level to support an equitable and sustainable economy. Together with our organizational members, we represent over 250,000 companies. We understand that a stakeholder economy working with equity focus and across all sectors can advance the needed solutions from renewable energy, regenerative agriculture, clean water, safer chemicals, transportation, green infrastructure, ESG investing, and more to tackle climate change and to build an equitable and sustainable economy and a vibrant democracy. We hope that all of you will join us as we continue to do the work that's needed to build an engaged business community. It has been our great pleasure to work with Gina McCarthy in her role as EPA administrator. And now we're extremely thrilled to see her in the role as the first ever head of the Domestic Climate Policy Office. And we strenuously applaud the bold climate actions already taken by the Biden-Harris administration. This is unprecedented. It's what we needed for years. And we're so proud of being able to witness it at this moment in time. Gina, I could say with certainty that ASBC and all of our businesses are ready to work side by side with you and the administration and to do everything we can to support your efforts, drive a shift in business and investor practices, and to mobilize the business community to advocate on behalf of the needed policies. It's now my great pleasure to turn it over to Ms. Gina McCarthy. Gina, please.
Well, David, thank you. And thank you for all of your leadership. And most importantly, thank you to all the businesses that are a part of ASBC. It's just great having an opportunity to talk to you. I feel like this is a moment in time, and we definitely tried to put out an executive order that recognized this moment in time. And I'm just really excited right now to understand how much engagement we have and the opportunities we have available to us. But it will have to be continued work on all of our part to deliver on all those promises. But we knew we had to go out of the gate and say, hey, this is not a little thing. This is a big thing. President Biden actually recognized that there were 4 big crises that we're facing today, and it's COVID-19, which had to be the first thing on the agenda because we've had no leadership on how to address one of the most staggering health challenges that the world has ever faced. We have the economic sort of downturn that resulted from that, which we know we have to basically spur again with investment, which brings us to the environmental justice and the racism question, which has been hitting us on the face, but we've been blind to it for far too long. And then we have climate. And so the most amazing thing that we're doing here is that you don't hear any of those issues being sidelined in a discussion as if things were only one thing to do. There is a way in which we have to get together to recognize that we have these 4 challenges and we have solutions if we think about those 4 things all at the same time, instead of pigeonholing these issues, much like you think sustainability. That is not a single dimension issue. It is multifaceted and it is intersectional. And much the same as the work you're doing here in the Business Council, we have to be able to think much more nimbly, which is why the marriage of thinking about these issues at the same time and thinking about a whole of government approach is exactly what we need to do, because we have to infuse this intersectional thinking in everything that happens across the federal government. All of the policies need to be revisited, the programs. We have to get into this century, this year, and most importantly, into the future and what we can build together. So I just can't tell you how excited I am. And I think we hit the mark pretty well with the executive order, because I'm getting calls from young people in Sunrise Movement and others saying, hey, can we come to work there? While at the same time, we're getting statements from some of the largest labor community, and they're actually bought all in. You know why? Because we didn't just talk about the dangers of climate change. We talked about what's real and what's human. We talked about right now, there's nothing more important than growing jobs. But if our job is to invest in the economy, shouldn't it be the jobs of tomorrow, not the jobs of yesterday? Shouldn't it be about where we want to go with environmental justice communities and finally make the investments that they have been dying for, literally, and instead support them in a disproportionate way, since they've been hammered disproportionately by everything else? And so we're looking to get a really significant commitment there. And it's necessary for us to do that in a couple of different ways. One is by using the strength of the whole of government, again, to relook at policies and standards, but just as equally to look at what we're spending money on. What signals are we sending to you and others in the private sector about what we value and what we want to deliver to the American public? And so you guys can be gigantic partners with us in talking about this as a fundamental business consideration. I'm just sick and tired of people thinking you can only pat your tummy and you can't, go like this at the same time. For crying out loud, you got to be able to think about this the way life is. And so I am so excited. I remember talking to the president about the rollout on this, and we talked about it, and I think one of the reasons why we get along so good is he said, Gina, you got to keep making this real. I'm like, well, right. You got to talk about jobs. You got to talk about clean energy jobs. You got to talk about not leaving communities behind. And equally important, as you're talking about new job growth, you'd have to talk about not leaving workers behind. We need union jobs that pay money. We need the people in areas of this country, communities, small and large, that are highly dependent on energy sector jobs that may have to shift. We need to call it out, and we need to create a venue for them to look at how they get revitalized. And we've created those opportunities. We've talked about the jobs. We've talked about the jobs that we think there are readily available to us to shift into with some resources that the federal government can put on the table. We've talked about a new civilian climate corps. What's wrong with that idea? You get people into the system, college graduates who yet don't have a job because this COVID-19 is keeping us so encapsulated in our homes. They can do great work out in the field. Go out and help with forest management. Go look at agriculture practices. Go work in clean energy in a way that will advance us. And honestly, I know that there are folks in the oil and gas sector that worry, and I know there are states highly dependent on revenues from oil and gas. We did nothing to interject or interrupt people's ability to keep their jobs today, but we did recognize that those jobs have been shifting to clean energy, and that's not a bad thing. But what will be bad is if we don't support that transition, we don't invest in infrastructure that will put people to work. And we fully intend to do that, because that is what this president means by build back better. And so we are not going to build backwards. We are going to build back better. And so that's the key. And having a working relationship, David, with you and with all of the community that you have brought together is going to be an important thing, because you have to help us make this economic message. I cannot make climate look like we're out of touch with the reality of today, or that people want to think about climate instead of jobs. I don't want to ask either of those two things, because President Biden says when someone says climate, he thinks jobs. That is how we have to live right now. And that is how we should live. You know, neither President Biden or I grew up thinking that any of our families could have gotten along if we didn't have a job, because we couldn't have. So we're not going to leave that behind now just because we need to move fast. We need to move fast, and we need to bring people with us. And I think you guys can help. You are sort of the ones that have figured out how to make that intersect work between all of these crises and how we move forward. So let's keep working on all the sectors in which you operate, so that people start thinking in a more sustainable way. And we can think about talking about these job opportunities in the most concrete and business way that we can, because that's what's going to make people sit up and take notice and recognize that what we're doing is truly investment and not sacrifice. I think I should leave it to there, but as you can tell, I'm pretty hooped up. I'm excited. I think the opportunities are there, and I think we ought to just go run and grab them.
Excellent. Well, this is so exciting to be working with you again. Wanted to try and squeeze in a few questions if we can. Yeah, great.
Oh, yeah.
So first we'll turn to Hans Cole from Patagonia. Hans.
Thanks, David. And Gina, thanks so much for your comments. It's inspiring to hear you talk. I appreciate it. You mentioned the Civilian Climate Corps. I was just curious if you could go a little bit more into that, with the status of the president's commitment to that program, and how can, the business community or nonprofit community help support that effort?
Good question. The first question is that we've already tapped the Department of Interior and USDA to work together to formulate that program and make it happen, because both of them have real opportunities for working on public lands and for actually developing a lot of different strategies to try to prevent the kind of forest fires and the devastation that we've seen before. Because part of this effort is resilience and adaptation. We can't just ignore that there's been, simply not enough attention paid to this. So part of the challenge for not being able to say more is that we don't quite have our cabinet members engaged on both of those. So hopefully we'll get those over the finish line in their confirmation process. I definitely think Secretary Vilsack is a well-known quantity, as is Governor Granholm. So that's energy. But I mean, Congresswoman Haaland. And so we'll keep pushing. But in the meantime, we're going to end up, I think, having to do some work directly with the agencies and their leadership to make sure that we get this off the ground soon. And when you ask how you can support it, I'm going to ask that question. I mean, I think that's tremendously important, because there may be ways in which you provide ready-made opportunities for people, for the young people to actually get to work. Now, this may not be, of a salary level that will attract people that have been having union jobs or have lost them, but there's a whole heck of a lot of people that are wanting to get the expertise they might accrue from doing work that we'll have to offer. So I'm really excited about it. I know we stole it from FDR and Truman. This will be ours. But Hans, can I get back to you? David, can I get back to you guys to see how we could actually make that happen?
That's right. Well,
Please.
We're ready to throw down and help on that. So Great. Next, we're going to turn to some of our partners in the healthcare sector. So Antonia, do we have you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, first I'd like to thank you so much. In the executive order yesterday, you announced that HHS will be setting up a new Office of Climate Change and Health Equity, and we were incredibly excited to hear that, so thank you for that. So in 2020, we obviously saw the climate and COVID crises converge and the vulnerability of our healthcare system as a result. So our question to you is, how will you plan to work with HHS, a critical agency, to ensure that the healthcare sector is both accountable for its carbon footprint, which is 8.5% of US greenhouse gas emissions, and plays a larger role in making sure they are prepared to address the climate impacts that are coming?
Well, I think there's going to be some growth opportunities here. You're right, we're starting up a small but mighty group. I know some of the names that have been thrown around, which gives me great hope that really good folks will get in there. HHS is a large agency, and they have never really, and I don't really mean this as criticism, maybe I do, but they've never really grabbed the issue of environmental health or environmental justice in a way that I think is as critical as it needs to be. And so this is a really major opportunity for us to change that and to look at the healthcare infrastructure. And thankfully, there are a lot of healthcare folks that have already sent us suggestions for how we can make sure to integrate that in. I totally agree with the way you're thinking about the depth of the opportunity there. And we'll have to work with HHS so that they make sure that they have people coming in who have the expertise that those that are already in don't necessarily have. So it is a multi-dimensional issue, but it's one that I've been working on for the past 4 or 6 years. And so I've had some great people at HHS. It just takes a little while to steer the ship differently. But now that there is a captain there, it's going to be a much different story. So we'll be tracking that and working on it, and everybody's help would be welcome on that as well.
Thanks.
Great. Next, Marianne Hallen, American Sustainable Business Institute's board chair. Marianne? Just unmute yourself so we can hear you then.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Gina. So yesterday at the White House press briefing, I was watching, you were with John Kerry, and I heard you say that the climate plan is about job creation, health equity, and climate justice, and it includes a 40% investment in disadvantaged communities.
Yes.
So that commitment of investment, how best can the American Sustainable Business Council, our members and allies in the larger business community, support your work on the ambitious agenda?
You know, I really would encourage you to think about a couple of different ways of doing that. And one is to make your voice heard on the most effective way that investment money can be spent. I just don't think, much like people were surprised that so many people of color were dying from COVID-19. Now I know, Marianne, you would have guessed that. I knew that was going to be the case, right? So people are all of a sudden sort of getting a better understanding of how concrete the challenges are in these communities. And so making it known that you want to have, cleaner air, and that comes not just with electric vehicles, but with public transit being invested in. Let's talk about the things that are going to be best in terms of infrastructure investment, so we can keep them top of our mind and at all times. But the other thing I think we need to do is really look at already existing programs and make sure that we're looking at opportunities for procurement that actually can invest in small Black and minority businesses. Let's not do what others did and just let those clever at scooping federal dollars scoop it all and leave the rest for those who have never been in the system and don't know how it works. And so we will have challenges, but we will be tracking this because that's our job. And one of the things we've put into place is a new environmental justice task force that's going to operate out of the White House, out of the Council for Environmental Quality. I'm sure many of you know Cecilia Martinez, who will be helping to spearhead that effort under Brenda Mallory, who's been a great friend and wonderful ally for a long time. And we're going to require equity leaders to be in leadership at all of the agencies because we need everybody's eyes and ears on this. So I think we're trying to build the system, not just the rhetoric, to make sure that we can track this without having to be everywhere. And so I think we'll be able to do that, and I'm quite sure you'll hold us accountable, as you should.
Well, that's great. And I know I promised you and your folks that we would let you go. So I'm wondering, we have a whole panel of our business leaders that will follow you and the like. And David Kiva, who was heading up the climate work for the campaign and the transition team, will stay on as well. But are there any last remarks you want to make before we set you free to keep doing this great work?
No, but David Kiva will remind me of the promise to get back to you on how we think we might sort of partner on this effort. I'm really excited about it. I think there are little things that mean a lot. And I think showing that we care about people who have lost their jobs or those who never can enter the workforce because of the pandemic that we're facing, there's real opportunity here to boost a few people up. And, you know, the only thing I'd want to ask you to do is to remain hopeful. You know, I really think that this is about making, you know, a statement that we are not going to be kept down by this pandemic or by the ways in which our economy has functioned in the past, that we are going to build a better future. And it's got to be a hopeful, engaging, positive message. And if we can do that, I don't think we'll lose. And I don't think we can lose because people are ready for it. Lord knows I've seen Wendy in that same seat how many times for how many months. Aren't you sick of it? Let's get out of it and have some fun together. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Gina McCarthy.
Take care.
So now we're going to turn it over to Mary Ann Howland to take us into the rest of the program as the president and co-founder of IBIS Communication and the American Sustainable Business Institute chair. Mary Ann?
My mic's on, great. Well, thank you, David. And wow, what an exciting moment to be gathered here to have this really inspirational conversation with our community. But first, I want to give respect to the indigenous people of the land where I live in Tenasseee Shores in Tennessee, which is the land of the Cherokee Nation. And I know that we have just a short amount of time, so I'm going to get to the quick of my comments, which are, when I hear climate crisis, Biden thinks jobs, I think entrepreneurship and procurement, as Gina mentioned. We know that the impacts of climate change take a higher toll on frontline populations that are most often people of color. And we know that the impact of climate change on health is worst among the most vulnerable, low-income communities and people with disabilities. And I was listening to a conversation with Taryn Williams of the American Center for Progress a couple of days ago, and she said something that is really true of the impact of environmental toxicity and the lack of quality healthcare benefits, that poverty causes disability and disability causes poverty. And due to the lower household income, Black and Latino households tend to spend more on cheaper foods that have greater negative environmental impacts, such as grain and protein and cereals and chicken. And then Black farmers are trying to grow healthy food for their family and communities, but they're vulnerable to drought, given limited access to resources and risk management systems. So we need to turn this vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. And finding the right solutions for decarbonization means talking to the people who are impacted the most. Yet according to the Green Plan, Black Americans are widely underrepresented in the growing fields of clean and renewable energy. And the Solar Foundation published a diversity report earlier this year that found that executive leadership in solar companies is almost exclusively white men. Surprise. And only 7.6% of solar workers nationwide are African American. And few have a strategy to increase the representation of people of color within those companies. Organizations and business leaders at the NAACP, the Urban League, Van Jones, founder of Dream Corps, and Lisa Jackson, the former head of the EPA, who now leads policy and social initiatives at Apple, they've been in the trenches for years. And not just African Americans, Native Americans of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe of North Dakota stopped the Dakota Pipeline, and they were supported by allies and co-conspirators, including our very dear friend Judy Wicks, founder of White Dog Cafe and one of the early pioneers in the sustainability movement, now a full-time activist, who kept us up to date with her Facebook photos from the front lines. And then there's the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska has been installing solar panels at a clip that saves $47,000 each year in energy costs. The Moapa River Indian Reservation is the home of the first utility scale project built on tribal land with 250 megawatts of capacity, enough to power an estimated 111,000 homes without fossil fuel pollution. And now a Dene woman, Walia Johns, has been selected to head the US Office of Indian Energy Programs and Policy. And she's co-founder and director of Native Renewables, a company that brings solar energies to Native American homes and trains Navajo solar installers. So the climate space is at the nexus of jobs, justice, and environment, but also entrepreneurship, new industry, and energy innovation and technology. And that's what gets me excited. There's a gentleman named Matthew Portis in Akron, Ohio, who founded Soul Green, the first and only Black-owned and operated company that has invented, engineered, and patented the first solar charging table or solar workstation that would modernize and maintain sustainable infrastructure in cities, parks, and outdoor public spaces. And if you guys have not met yet Ungwen Eneo, she's this brilliant young woman of Nigerian heritage who grew up in Southern Illinois, who co-founded Shift Power Solutions, which is an energy technology company that's pioneering the use of IoT, software, and big data to improve access to clean, reliable, and affordable energy solutions in markets that struggle with grid resiliency. And then there's leadership training at our country's HBCUs and the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, the HBCU Climate Change Consortium, and the HBCU CBO Gulf Equity Consortium. And they're all doing research on climate impacts on vulnerable communities. So the movement for a transition to a decarbonized economy, a sustainable economy, cannot succeed until there are structural changes in society to redress centuries of systemic racism. And I've just shared a few of examples of that. There are many more, and there's a lot of work to get done. Carbon tax, Arctic drilling, ending investment in fossil fuels, supporting the Green New Deal. The American Sustainable Business Council is focused on all of these through the lens of race and equity justice. What should policy look like to create the equity that the Biden-Harris administration has executive ordered? We have working groups of leaders across the country that focus on election reform, community development, investor responsibility, health justice, and food justice. And we invite you to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. And now we'll quickly turn to Mary McClure, President and CEO of Green Mountain Power. Mary?
Hi, everybody. Wow, I'm like, oh, geez. What a tremendous opportunity to hear from Gina and you, Mary Ann, so far, and to be a part of this great panel. Thank you to ASBC for having me and allowing me to have some moments to share what's on my heart and mind these days. It's kind of hard to pick which direction to go with it. But I thought I might share some thoughts I'm having that are really aimed at those of you who are business leaders or on leadership teams, and you're thinking of the issues that we're confronting really as a world that we just heard Mary Ann and Gina talk about a little. I heard Gina reference before she started that I've had the opportunity to hear her give this advice, and I've been referencing it now for a couple of years. I was lucky enough to hear her in Boston a couple of years ago, and she was responding to a question that was around, what do I do, or how do I answer somebody who's struggling to believe about the impacts to our climate from greenhouse gas emissions? And she said, well, just tell them three things. One, climate change is real. Two, it was caused by man-made emissions. And three, that's why women need to be in charge. And I've been using that as I go around as a way to really start a conversation on these issues, and really use what's happening around the country and the world during this pandemic to take advantage of this crisis and really effectuate change. So I have the pleasure of leading Green Mountain Power here in Vermont. We're the state's largest electric utility. We're a proud certified B Corp, and we're a member of ASBC. We serve about 70% of the state of Vermont with clean, reliable power. And we believe, and our customers believe, that energy should be and can be used as a force for good. So we're well on our way to serving our customers with 100% renewable power by 2030 and 100% carbon-free power by 2025. But if you just think of us in the traditional sense of a utility, we're responsible for making power, transmitting it across power lines throughout the state, and then distributing it to homes and businesses so that when our customers flip the light switch on, like magic, the lights go on. But we're much, much more than that. And we have to be. And every business is much, much more than just their end product or just their end service. Every business is a part of something bigger, a supply chain, a customer base, a group of facilities, a fleet of equipment, a power portfolio. I used to think that those of us in the energy industry had more of an imperative to tackle these issues because our product and our mission, directly link to climate and greenhouse gas emissions. So it's imperative on those of us in this industry to reduce emissions from our generating facility, from our supply of power to our customers. It's imperative that we make cleaner power, that we make our system more resilient. Our system gets knocked down and our teammates have to go out and pick it up by increasingly severe weather events. And we see the impacts in a very real way as our customers have faced more and more extreme outage events over the last 10 years. But the reality is, it doesn't matter what business you're in, you are directly linked to these issues. Your product or your service is impacted by it. Your employees are impacted by it. And the good news about that is you have the ability to do something about it. And these aren't always easy decisions to make in our businesses, are they? That it might mean you have to pivot away from something you've always done. You might need to advocate in a way you never have. You might need to partner with another business you never thought you would. Maybe you have to use your expertise in an entirely different way. And as leaders, we often ask ourselves, what is the right decision? What direction should we go? What options should we take? And sometimes when the options are difficult to ascertain or the future seems particularly uncertain, think about asking yourself the opposite. Ask yourself which way you would rather be wrong. And so on the issues of systemic racism, on our warming climate, the impacts both of those are having on your business now and are going to have, which would you regret the most? Going too fast or going too slow? So when I think about managing risks, we're managing risks in our life in so many ways in our businesses. We name the risk, we educate ourselves on it, and we get to work mitigating it. And it makes business sense to do that. If you didn't do it, your business wouldn't survive. And equity and climate challenge should be right up there on your assessment of risks to your business. Business leaders have a huge part to play in educating ourselves on the vast network that our product or service is made in, and working really to tackle the impacts that network is having on the issues we're facing, and to do it quickly. So I know that
Thank you.
from my perspective, the Domestic Climate Office, I think will help business leaders really scale up that work, and we'll be able to do it more on a national level. And I'm really inspired by it. So thank you for the time.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. All right, quickly over to Wendy New, Chair and CEO of Hugo New Corporation. Wendy.
Wow. Okay. This is a hard act to follow. But here I am, and I excuse myself if I'm sneezing a little bit during this short presentation. So look, the timing of this couldn't be better in terms of the announcements that were made yesterday and the signals that are being sent to the marketplace, which I personally have been desperate for, given the work that I do. I'm a real estate developer, not something I'm proud of. Neither was it something that I aspired to. I started my career 7 years working in maximum and medium security prisons as a social worker, not as an inmate. And I learned a great deal about the inequity that is embedded in our system today. So it was an experience that was a defining time for me in terms of how I would go forward. Fast forward to 2013, I ended up with a 130-acre brownfield site on a peninsula between the Hackensack River and the Passaic River in New Jersey. Kearney, New Jersey. I'm sure none of you have heard of Kearney, New Jersey, but it's right between Jersey City and Newark. So this was a site that had an enormous had made an enormous contribution to both World War I and World War II, in that it was a shipbuilding facility, heavy industrial facility built by US Steel in 1917. And from that moment forward, and it was actually very crucial in, as Roosevelt said, in winning the war at sea, this facility had suffered all the environmental impacts that we have imposed over the last century. So we have everything. We're ground zero for climate, sea level rise, from air pollution, water pollution, you name it, contamination, we had it. 2013, after Sandy, this was 2 months after Sandy, when I took control of the property, I had two decisions to make. I have an environmental background as well as a social justice background, no real estate experience to speak of. And there were two decisions. I could leave it as is because we happened to be in a location that was strategic in terms of it being very close to the Port of Newark, New York City, and points west. So it was we never had to worry about tenants and what have you. It was always full. That Sandy hit, even 4 feet underwater, tenants lost enormous amount of money, and they never left because it only speaks to the location, not the quality of the buildings. These were old 100-year-old buildings from 1917. And I had two choices. I could either raise the site, pave it, put up industrial distribution warehouses that wouldn't create the kinds of jobs that have always been a major driver for me, but it would rent out. I could walk away and collect revenue. That was not something that appealed to me. I've always been mission driven. I always felt that whatever business I was in, which was recycling prior to this for many years, had to have more than just, it had to be more than just profitable. It had to have a purpose, and I had to have a purpose, and my employees that surrounded me, I think, felt very similarly and stayed with me as a result, I think, mostly because of that. So here I am, I have the site, and I thought, well, maybe I can use this as something more than just a real estate development project, but more as a platform, a vehicle for real change. Because as it turned out, all the things that I cared about, whether it was inequity in the system, whether it was environmental issues, climate, I had to deal with them on this site, and how I did that would matter. And so we eventually, I mean, we're now a case study of sorts because we are trying new and different things. But what I did initially was I wanted to, my main driver was also to employ people who had been left behind and marginalized. And we were able to do that personally because I had an interest in the criminal justice system. So I hired many people who had been formerly incarcerated, who have been with me for 10, 12, 15 years now. And they are now supervisors, and they are now a driver. They're actually helping me with strategy and making my workplace a much more vital and interesting place to be, but also a much more, we have different perspectives. And that adds, it has added so much value. But in addition to that, we're driven now by seeing that we can make a difference on this site. Now it's 130 acres. And we are doing things in terms of the environment and infrastructure, stormwater treatment, and we're testing different technologies on the site that deal with some of the environmental problems that we're faced with. But in addition to that, we're recognizing that it goes beyond the boundaries. I don't think of myself as an owner. I think of myself as a steward of this land. And I think that's a paradigm shift that we have to make in order for us to succeed at this. And this is the right moment for that. And so I recognize now that even though there are property lines, I'm being affected by everyone else around me. So the Amazons, the distribution centers, all the permeable surface that surrounds me, a lot of those impacts hurt me. So it has to be a regional approach, a watershed, municipality, county approach to dealing with these issues, because I won't make a difference unless we can expand this. But
Wendy?
I'm sorry. No, my main
Yes.
point is that any of our business, as Marie said, are platforms for these kinds of changes. And thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry to cut you.
No.
Squeeze everyone in.
I
We're
got it.
squeezing everyone. All right. Hey, next over to Hans. Hans, he's still with us there. Fantastic. Hans Cole, VP of Activism at Patagonia.
Hey, thanks, David. And man, it's a real honor to be on this panel with all the speakers today. I really appreciate the comments so far. And Wendy, I want to hear the rest of your story. And it's really great to be here. It's an exciting moment. I know for our whole community, it's just so exciting to be in a place where we can go on offense. We've been on defense and we got to go on offense. So that energy, that switch and flip is alive and well at Patagonia. And, you know, huge thanks to everyone for all the comments so far. Patagonia's company mission states that we're in business to save our home planet. And for us, that means a lot of things, but we're definitely deeply committed on climate. You know, we have a goal to be net zero on greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. We're aiming for that. We're currently 100% powered by renewable energy. Love to hear the energy comments earlier. But I wanted to focus today on a couple of particular sort of areas of climate action that we think businesses and our communities should really pay closer attention to. And that may be off the radar of some folks out there, but it was exciting because these were actually front and center in some of the executive orders yesterday. The first one is nature-based climate solutions, or natural solutions to climate change. And the second one is regenerative organic agriculture as a solution to climate change. Yesterday, we saw, you know, these great executive orders go out, a pause on new oil and gas leasing on our public lands and waters. Great, it's great. It's a great step. Support for the goal of conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. And then the final one I would highlight on the agricultural realm is an effort to collect input from tribes, from local communities, ranchers, farmers, on how the Department of Agriculture's funding and resources and initiatives can focus on carbon sequestration and drawing down carbon from our atmosphere. So exciting stuff, great first steps from this administration that we really support. Why are these two things so important to us, nature-based climate solutions and regenerative organic agriculture? First of all, we know that the US Geological Survey has noted that 25%, close to 25% of our emissions in this country come from fossil fuel extraction on our public lands and waters. 25%, it's huge. And that includes drilling, mining, transporting, all sorts of different activities in that space. And globally, conventional agriculture with all of its chemical inputs and fossil fuel intensive activities contributes about a quarter of the global greenhouse gas emissions, while simultaneously having all sorts of other impacts on water, on communities, on workers, toxicity, all sorts of things that are felt by people and by our planet. We need to flip this script. We need to see our lands and waters, both our sort of wild lands and our ecosystems out there, and our agricultural lands, not as climate liabilities, but as climate solutions. And we are really committed to seeking out some of the solutions and finding ways for the business community to be a louder voice in this space. For us on the land and water side, that starts with things like the executive orders yesterday. It also involves identifying areas that need protection, like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and seeking permanent protection for those places. These are efforts that are supported by local indigenous people, like the Gwich'in in the Arctic. The Gwich'in are feeling the direct impacts of climate change much more than many other communities. They're right on the front lines, even as they fight to protect that place up in northern Alaska that's so critical for their culture and their well-being. I was glad to hear the comments earlier all around justice and equity and the important work that this administration is doing in that space. As we look at things like pausing our extraction of fossil fuels across this country for 60 days, we need to push that further, and we need more support from the business community in doing so. But again, the impacts of extraction are most often directly felt by frontline communities, diverse communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color. They're feeling the brunt of this, even as they contribute the least to these problems in most cases. So these are efforts, these nature-based climate solutions and agriculture as well, that intersect perfectly with environmental justice and the human side of the equation, even though they're talking about land, land and water conservation, which traditionally has had a different slant. And even for our company in the recreation sector, it's not just about recreation. It's not just about loving these places anymore. It's literally about protecting our planet and involving everyone in doing that and being as inclusive and oriented towards justice as possible. So we're fired up about this. On the agricultural side, climate smart agriculture can no longer be considered an afterthought in terms of policy. We need to be advocating directly with the Department of Agriculture, with clearly, David, and with Gina, with your office, around how to see policies that actively diminish, if not entirely eliminate, the use of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. These are things that raise our greenhouse gas emissions, as well as being toxic to people, local communities, again, frontline communities most often feeling this impact, certainly where I live in California. And it's also key to note that all this work is also good for our economy. It's great to hear Gina earlier speaking to jobs and the importance of the human equation in all of this. Organic is one of the fastest growing food sectors in the United States. Patagonia has an operation called Patagonia Provisions. So believe it or not, we're actually not just making fleeces and outdoor gear, we're also selling food and organic food. And we know that in counties and communities that have clusters of organic farming, they see incredible increased median household incomes and lowered poverty rates. And this has a huge impact economically. So I'll wrap up and just say that I really encourage our business community, other members of ASBC, to get behind these efforts to protect lands, waters, to shift our thinking around agriculture. we'd love to join others in doing that. And thanks again so much for the opportunity to be here, a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Hans. Now over to Joey Bergstein, the CEO of Seventh Generation. Joey?
Sorry, I was listening so intently, I forgot to unmute myself. It's an honor to be with all of you today, and I feel like we have turned the page and are in a new chapter. And as a new U.S. citizen, relatively new U.S. citizen, I'm proud to be part of this next chapter as we go forward. Some generation, we make eco-friendly home and personal care products, but more than that, we have a mission to transform the world into a healthy, sustainable, and equitable place for the next 7 generations. And that feels like an incredibly important mission at this moment in time, where the time is so short that we need to take real and meaningful action if we want to address climate between now and 2030 and limit climate change to no more than the 1.5 degrees. David had asked me to speak a little bit about climate and plastics and the intersection of that. Gina spoke about intersectionality. I think many of us have been talking about intersectionality, how all these crises are coming together, and plastics is no different. It plays a really important role in the challenges that are in front of us. And yeah, I think we all think about plastics, and what's most obvious is the waste crisis that is created by plastics. It's showing up in our landfills, it's showing up in our oceans, it's showing up in our seafood. But what we don't think about in the same way is the impact that it's having on our climate, because it's also creating and contributing to the climate crisis that's in front of us beyond just waste. And it's also part of a human health crisis that we're faced with today. So on the climate front, we know that that at every level of production in plastics, from extraction through the making of the plastics, the transportation of the plastics, it starts with fossil fuel, and it is emitting greenhouse gases at every single stage, and contributing to the vast greenhouse gases that we're faced with as a world, as a population here in the U.S. It contributes to the health crisis because plastic is showing up everywhere. It's showing up in our oceans. It's showing up inside the phytoplankton, the zooplankton. It's in the food that we're eating as we're extracting that from the oceans. But when you see the greenhouse gases as well that are being emitted in the production of plastic, that's obviously having a big impact on the environment around us. It's polluting, it's polluting the world that we're living in. It's absolutely critical that we take real action to address this plastic crisis that's in front of us. So what do we do about it? As a company that has long been using plastics, we know that we're part of the problem. And as a leader in the industry, we've been determined to take real action to be able to address it. And for us, it really starts in using what we call better plastics, so post-consumer recycled content. We're trying to get as much of the plastic that we're using, not from virgin plastic and creating new emissions, but using recycled content in what we're using. Transparency. We're about to publish in 2021 the first ever footprint that we've published that discloses what our plastic footprint is, a really important thing to do. Transparency, without transparency, you can't make progress. And when all of a sudden you've named it and put it out there, then it forces you to take action and to address the issues that are in front of us. And then the next area is around reduction and really reducing our reliance on plastics. We're innovating in a number of different places to reduce the amount of plastic. One of the best examples we have right now is this ultra concentrated laundry detergent that we launched about 1.5 years ago. It is 70% lighter. It uses 60% less plastic, 50% less water. So when you ship it around the country, it's creating a fraction of the greenhouse gas, but it's also a fraction of the waste. It's one great example of where you can get the exact same performance, but in a fraction of the space and the size, and trying to move the industry to adopt solutions like that. We're also working on plastic-free lines. We launched a beta test in the fall where we were using packaging that had absolutely no plastic in it. And the big insight for us is that if you want to get rid of the plastic, you actually have to get rid of the water, which means that instead of using a plastic liquid to clean your toilet bowl, maybe you use a plastic powder, not plastic powder. Instead of using a liquid to clean your toilet bowl, maybe you use a powder to clean the toilet bowl. And this was incredibly exciting for a lot of people. That line sold out really quickly, and we're moving really quickly to figure out how can we get that into the market at scale. But at the core of all of this, we really need to think about how do we reinvent? How do we think differently about how we bring solutions to people? People need to keep their homes clean, but they don't necessarily want the packaging that goes along with it. So how can we reinvent the way that we're cleaning our homes, giving people different solutions, and making life better for them? So, you know, my big call to the business leaders that are with us on this call today is to really think about how do we innovate differently, find systemic solutions, find ways that as an industry we can move forward and be creative in giving people the things that they need, but doing it in a way where we're minimizing the impact for this generation and the generations to come.
Thank you, Joey. So now we're going to turn to Thomas Opal, the Executive Vice President of the American Sustainable Business Council. Talk a bit.
Thanks, David, and thanks to everybody. This has been an amazing panel, and I will say it's a little intimidating to follow this group, but the great thing about it is that everyone has talked about a lot of the issues that ASBC was founded to help tackle and continues to work on. The thing that continues to strike me, to steal a term from identity studies, is the intersectionality of all of these issues: the pandemic, the economic crisis, the climate crisis, the racial justice crisis. They're all interwoven, and you can't really tackle one without having to tackle all of them. You know, we need to be assured that the actions that we take, for example, on the environment, don't exacerbate problems for communities of color and those frontline communities. The other thing, and Joey mentioned this, you know, the whole point of the American Sustainable Business Council is to make the case that doing these things on climate, on a more equitable economic system, on racial justice, on healthcare and dealing with pandemics, is about boosting our economy, not taking away from it. That the argument that somehow you have to make this choice between a healthy environment and a healthy economy has always been false, and has certainly never been more false than it is today. That in fact, the work we do on the environment will help the economy, and the work we do on a more equitable economy will help everyone. So we're continuing to work on this. I should mention really quickly, in the last year, we produced two major studies that looked at, first of all, making the economy work for all, and touched across a range of issues that we've been working on. And second, that was led by our CEO, Jeffrey Hollander. David led a second group that looked at actions that states and localities could take in the wake of the pandemic to build back better on their own, without waiting for the federal government, which clearly in the last 4 years hasn't been too active in terms of helping. So I would recommend those studies to you. We're going to continue to work on all of these issues. We're going to continue to work as we've already begun with the Biden administration, which we think has gotten off to a great start. We want to be there to support those bold and ambitious efforts. And at times, I'm sure that we'll be in a position to maybe push a little bit too. But we're very excited about the opportunities with this new administration. And I think, as Hans said, to finally play offense instead of playing defense for the last 4 years. I could go on about the work we're doing, but I'll just advise you to check out our website, asbcouncil.org, and that will give you a flavor of the work we're doing. And we hope, if you're not already a member, as so many of the fabulous presentation folks doing presentations are, if you're not already a member, please consider membership. We need your help. David?
Great. So, it's with that that we're going to take this to a close and thank all of you for joining us today. And in particular, to thank Ms. Gina McCarthy, Mary Ann Howland, uh, Mary McClure, Wendy New, Joey Bergstein, Hans Cole, Thomas, and David Keeve for all your help in leading up to this, without which we wouldn't have the administration to be able to work with. So, now it's up to us. Let's build this business and invest the movement to really do the work that we need to do. As Gina offered, we got to keep banging at the door to support the work and also push them to even greater things. So now is our movement as a responsible, concerned, ESG oriented, SD oriented, green, sustainable, just, equitable business community to get to work. So thank you all for your work over the years, and we look forward to making this work going forward for now, and as Joey would say, for 7 generations to come, right? Thank you all for joining us.